Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I recently watched the Stranger Things season 4 part 1. And I got to say it stands out on its own more than the rest of the seasons. This one was definitely a prelude to something bigger. It was very slow, very long. Not bad necessarily. It had some really cool stuff in it, and it setting up for some really cool stuff eventually. But in and of itself, it was more an endless amount of setup rather than a season in and of itself. I still did enjoy it, but I I don't think it's as good as season one, especially. I'm very much in the camp that season one should have been one and done. But since they decided to continue, I really can't fault them for that. But yeah, it definitely wasn't as good as season one, probably equal to seasons two, and maybe a little bit better than season three. It was just really slow, was more the problem, and it was very long. Every episode was like an hour and a half long. It was a bit much. It was a bit much a few times, but I did like the development of a lot of the characters despite all of that. Steve Harrington is still my favorite character, and he's getting out of that awkward phase that he was in season three and really going back into his own, balancing the new heart he had with the cool guy that was in season one. And I really appreciate that. And Robin, she's still really good. She's one of my favorite parts of season three. She just had some really great chemistry with Steven. She was a lot of fun, and she was just a cool person. And she's, I think, at least a good example of one of the few times Netflix has done a gay arc positively without getting it overwhelmed with it being her whole character. She was very much her own person, and that was just an aspect of it. And that, I really think, is how you need to do it correctly. The biggest part of improvement for this season was with the character of Max. Now, for the last two seasons, she's been my least favorite by a mile. She's just been incredibly unlikable, incredibly mean, and not in an endearing way, and not in a way that it was condemned, like you're a flawed person for being so mean and whatnot. It was set up as a strength and necessary, and it just came across as a bitch, honestly, and I really didn't like her. I didn't like her chemistry with Lucas or anything like that. I just did not care about her character whatsoever. But with this season, she showed a degree of vulnerability with some of the things that happened with her. Her whole story arc, she had more screen time, or at least more plot specific screen time than previously, and that gave her time to develop, and she changed. She realized that she was wrong, and she opened up to people, and her chemistry with Lucas, I think, finally started. So she's still not even close to my favorite character, but I like her as a character now. So that is a massive improvement over previous seasons. And there were a few things that I thought were strange, and this has kind of been building up over the seasons. They really can't decide how big Hawkins is. Not really a flaw necessarily, but in season one, they made it seem like Jim was the chief of police, and then he had his two police officers, and that was it. And that it was just a very small town, just the main street, really, and then a bunch of houses spread out in the woods around it, and there wasn't a police force. This one is saying that they have dozens and dozens of officers. Season 3 had a giant mall, and it's fine, not necessarily a flaw, but it's kind of gives me whiplash when it constantly changes how big Hawkins is from a really small town to a small metropolis. Not necessarily a bad thing, but this season continued that trope of really how big is Hawkins. And a lot of the new characters I still did enjoy, but none of them stood out like in the past. Argyle was fine. He was just a junkie, just a weed head. And, there was nothing wrong with that. He had a lot of good chemistry with Jonathan. That was nice. And the really new guy, Eddie, I actually did enjoy his character. He still hasn't been around a whole lot yet. And from the trailers, I thought he was going to have a very, very different role than he ended up having. And it worked out. He has some good chemistry with everyone. And before I go any further, I do want to mention that I will be talking about spoilers briefly, but not anything super major. And I do like that Steve and Nancy are getting back together. I really respected that at the end of season one that they were still together. That was the unorthodox decision, and I think it was the right decision. I didn't really like Jonathan and Nancy's chemistry in seasons 2 or 3, and I think they should have stuck with Steven, and it looks like that's the route they're going to go. Jonathan more wound up with his friendships rather than his love interest, and Nancy's just better with Steven. They have a lot better chemistry with each other, and so it looks like they're going back in that direction with it. I appreciate it's the horror aspect is nice. The villain of the season, he had a good twist of who he was and what he was and stuff like that. The actor playing him does a good job, but that actor, he's played a villain before, and he just has a kind of, sucks to say it, but creepy diddler vibe about him. And so as soon as he came on the scene in 11's flashbacks, I kind of knew he was going to end up being a bad guy. It sucks, but it's just kind of how it worked out. And, I can't really blame the movie for that or the show for that. It's not really its fault. I mean, it did cast him, but it's just something I recognized immediately. But what he ended up being was a surprise to me, and it was very well telegraphed and kind of a cool twist. It was a cool twist, at least in my opinion. The biggest thing I didn't like about this story is how they revealed that Jim survived. It was not explained adequately, at least for me. In season 3, it showed several Russians in hazmat suits next to the gate key getting disintegrated on the lower level from the gate key. They were looking up at it. This show just says, oh, Jim hopped off the ledge to the lower level and didn't get disintegrated, even though there were people in hazmat suits across the room on the same level, probably about the same distance from the key that it got evaporated. I think a better explanation definitely needed to be made. I know New Rockstars thought when it originally aired season 3 that he jumped through the gate, and I think that would have been a cooler explanation, one that would make sense a little bit more than just, oh, I just kind of got out of the way a little bit. That was very underwhelming, at least in my opinion. Besides that, his Russia stuff was actually really cool. He's evolving as a character. I mean, even just beyond, shaving his head and beard, he feels like a different character who's gone through a lot, and it really comes across, especially with his interaction with the other characters. And his rescue sequence was great. I really enjoyed it. Joyce, she's still great. Joyce is a fun character, a very strong, independent woman done correctly, written well, with flaws and, motivations that make sense. And I really enjoy her character, and her and Murray have great chemistry. So the two of them fighting against the collective might of Russia to free Jim was very interesting, very cool, and very well done, very well explained. It wasn't just some random bullshit. Like, they had a plan and they executed it well. So all that stuff was great with Hopper and them. I feel like Mike and Will really didn't have anything to do this season, and Jonathan, they just kind of were around for most of it, and it's fine. It looks like it's setting up more for when they reunite with Elle in part 2 of the season. Nothing too exciting, they're just kind of around, but not really anything to do with. I do hear that Will is supposedly supposed to come out as gay. It didn't happen here, and I think it has to do with that painting that he's been carrying around, that he's going to come out to Mike and maybe say that he's in love with Mike. It makes sense for Will's character, at least in my opinion. Like, he comes off that way, and he did for a long time. And, I don't have any problems with it. It's telegraphed well, as long as it doesn't all of a sudden absorb and make it his whole character. Fine with it. If they approach it like they approach Robin's gayness, no problem with it. Just an aspect of his character, and it looks like it could work with these variables, at least in place. And Susie was fun. As someone who grew up Mormon, I can understand how a crazy, chaotic household like the one they went to where she lived existed. I had friends who lived that same lifestyle, and it was kind of funny. It was kind of funny, at least for me. Elle's backstory, it was getting long. I'm glad that they rushed it. The flashback sequences were a bit much. The CGI for de-aging Elle to being 6 was good. That was good. And seeing Dr. Brenner back, we kind of all knew he was alive for a very, very long time before this. Most people didn't believe he died in season 1, and, it turns out they were correct. I don't like that whole bit. It was just it's dragging out too long. It was mainly an excuse to reveal who number 1 is. I think that's the only reason they went with this direction of endless flashbacks, but it was getting way too long and not a whole lot was happening, and they didn't really explore the concept of children being raised in this type of environment. I feel like they could have gotten a lot further with that if that was the route that they decided to go, which they ended up doing. It was just either missed opportunities included with too much of the wrong stuff, at least in my opinion. So Elle's arc in this so far, at least, I really didn't enjoy all that much. It was very distracting, and I hope it's just used to set up some bigger stuff in the end of season 4 and the beginning of season 5, which apparently will be the last. And this one definitely feels, like Mockingjay Part 1 or Deathly Hallows Part 1, part 1 of a story where a whole lot of information happens, but not a whole lot actually happens. And, it wasn't great. I did really like Steve and Nancy and them in the Upside Down. That whole storyline was interesting, and I just wanted to get back to it. And them communicating with Dustin on the other side, going to the next level, explaining the Upside Down a little bit more. A lot of stuff that they revealed about it, like how it was frozen on the day that Will got kidnapped when he went missing in the Upside Down, was good, because I'd had questions like that before, like how does things move there when you pick up a boat oar on the right side up? Does it move in the upside down? Just some, I, there weren't clear cut rules, and I think they explained those rules very well with saying that the upside down somehow adapted to the right side up, that it was never originally always just a reverse of our plane, that it became that after it was introduced to our plane. And I do wonder why that didn't happen when one showed up in it back in the 70s, and why it did with Will. Like, what was the difference between those two scenarios? Do question that, but it is a cool concept that I'm glad that they're going down and explaining some of the rules and the logic. That was cool. And yeah, a lot of the rest of it was just exposition dump after exposition dump. Not a whole lot of other plot happened that I haven't talked about. But overall, I did enjoy it, but more from a what's next type of vibe. It's not a story that you want to enjoy in the moment. It's a story to set up a story that you might enjoy. So I'm really looking forward to season 5, because this season does show you a lot of cool stuff, but it's not portrayed in a very good storytelling fashion. Like, it's very slow, very all over the place, very inconsistent. So I'd have to say it's a little bit better than season 3, but that's about all that I can say for it, just because of the interesting concepts. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Anon. If you like what I do here and want to see good, compelling stories that Hollywood will no longer give you, check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues. Books 1, Down in Flames, and Book 2, Apocalypse Then, currently on sale. Book 3, Kill the Dark, coming soon.